welcome. It's nice to have you here. Today is the Relaxing to Health, Wealth, and Happiness meeting. And so, as usual, I'd like to start by briefly reviewing what is the intention, what can you expect to receive, or how can you expect to benefit by participating, and how best can you participate. So the intention of this meeting is to support self-realization, which means for you to recognize who you are and to live from that recognition so that you can experience the qualities of yourself manifest, qualities like peace, freedom, contentment, acceptance. Go on, but I think that maybe suffices for now. So this is possible for everyone because it's who you are. So it's not something that is reserved for some few. But it does require that you are sincere. So if you are looking for a quick fix for, I know this would not be true of anybody who's here live, but I have to say some of these things for people who find it on YouTube, because apparently all kinds of people find these videos on YouTube. I don't even understand the majority, most of the comments that come across. They don't even make any sense to me. So I don't really know who all the people are who find these things on YouTube, but I want to ensure that people have the most likelihood of having success with what's available here. So I set people up for success. So make sure that people know they're in the right place. So it's not for people who are looking for a quick fix for some kind of superficial problem. Now, I know our problems rarely seem superficial. They usually seem quite problematic. They seem very substantial to us. And but really the opportunity and the invitation here is for us to go deeper, and that involves us pausing and slowing down and actually taking a look at what's really happening so that we can find out, what do I really need? What do I really want? Who am I really? What is the purpose of my life? What is this all about? How can I succeed in what I'm really here for? And when we do that, we'll find that the things that we think are the problems are not actually the problem. And this is a big relief, because we've spent most of our lives, and possibly many lifetimes, focusing on all the wrong things, focusing on all of the problems that weren't really the problems. And so no matter how much we achieve in regard to those things, we never actually satisfy ourselves truly, because we're focused on the wrong things. It's like, if you really, if your destination is China, I mean, just as a kind of silly example, but if your destination is China, and you're caught up in, which is the best, debating which is the best, I don't know, barbecue restaurant in Atlanta, and you're not actually getting to where you want to go. And so most of us are caught up in these things that are not actually going to satisfy us because they're off the mark, but we don't know that. So this invitation here is for us to actually take a look and find out what we really want, and to begin to have the courage to put our attention consistently on that, because that's what's going to give us the real satisfaction. Everything else cannot possibly do that. So again, just not for quick fixes. Quick fixes don't actually they're a big distraction for the most part. I mean, sometimes a quick fix is possibly valuable in extreme circumstances to help somebody get out of a bad situation that they might be in, whether that's physically or emotionally or whatever. But it really, we want to start to focus on what is it we really want. So so that's what's available here, and it's not a quick fix, but at the same time, when we approach it correctly, then we can immediately begin to recognize something of who we are and what we truly want and where that exists, and we can access that instantly. So it's not a quick fix, and at the same time, when we approach it correctly, it does actually instantaneously connect us with what it is that we're truly desiring. But then the process is one in which we have to refine that because we have all of these habits that interfere with that. And if none of this makes sense, I mean, this probably all makes sense to the people who are here live, but again, people who find this on YouTube, maybe none of this makes any sense at all to begin with, but maybe it will make sense. It certainly can make sense if you have some patience with it. So that's the intention. That's what's available. As to how you can make the most of this, how can you actually benefit from this? As I say, it's in the name of the meeting, which is Relax into Health, Wealth, and Happiness. So the health, wealth, and happiness is who you are. Health and wealth are wholeness. Happiness is probably also wholeness. We're talking about wholeness. We're talking about contentment. We're talking about peace. We're talking about freedom. So how do you access that? You relax into it. Because from my observation, at least, most of what's on offer out there in the world is you need to do more. You need to work harder. You need to know more stuff. You need to, it's all very complicated. And I'm sure that there's a level at which that's true. You know, if you want to achieve mastery in certain kinds of specialized things, then maybe you do have to apply yourself and do a lot of hard work in a particular way. But here, what we're talking about is, again, knowing who you actually are, what you really want, and when you and the truth is who you are. What you really want is who you are. And so how do you access that? How do you receive that? It's not by trying harder. It's not by complicating things. It's actually by simplifying things. It's about getting clearer by removing all that's unnecessary from your perception, because all that's happening is that your perception is just clouded. And this causes a lot of confusion and heartache and pain and all that. But as we clear that away, then what's revealed is the simplicity of who you are, which is what you want, which gives you everything that you desire. And so we access that by relaxing. But as I often point out, this relaxation is a true relaxation, which is an active relaxation, not a passive relaxation, meaning that you have to be present. You have to actually be consciously engaged in the process of relaxing. And I point this out because I think many times we make the mistake, because it's what we've been led to believe, that relaxation is numbness or unconsciousness. And that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a conscious presence, which is required because you actually have to notice things. You have to be attentive. You have to be aware of what is interfering with the realization of who you are and what you want. And then also, on the flip side of that, you have to be attentive to notice who it is that you are and what you want. So your presence is required. So it's not like just slumber your way to health, wealth, and happiness. It's relaxing deeply into yourself. So that requires that you are present to notice, who am I and what am I not? Letting go of what you're not so that you can rest more and more deeply into what you are. So that's just the setup so that everybody can make sure they're in the right place and can make the most of this. And then and that if you are in doubt at any point, then just remember that, because just come back to this active relaxation, because that will give you everything. With all of that said, then we can get to the topic for today, which is having the courage to be yourself. So I'm saying having the courage to be yourself, and it's true that it requires courage to be yourself. But before we can even get to the point of having the courage to be yourself, there's another layer that we have to first get through, which is having the being encouraged. So you have to have the courage, but before you can have the courage, you have to be encouraged to be bold and unreasonable, to uh, slip the shackles of the false limitations that are imposed by uh, society that serves more as a prison than it does anything else. And I say that that can be misunderstood. Anything can be misunderstood. So I'm not saying that you should view society entirely negatively and that you should become misanthrope and things like that. But I am saying that if you are not willing to be bold and unreasonable, then, and if you just blindly accept what society tells you about who you are and what you should want and what's possible, then you will, the likelihood of you actually discovering who you are and having the courage to be fully who you are is very small, because the society, at least presently, I don't know that it always has to be this way or always has been or always will be. In fact, that seems very unlikely, but presently, um, there's a bit of a race to the bottom in terms of society, because there's a kind of a fear that runs a good part of the sort of the machine of society is run in no small part by fear. And there's, I think, probably some easy to understand reason why that would be. Humans are social animals, so uh, historically, if and even present day, really, if a person is uh, deviates sufficiently from the norms of society, then they run the risk of being outcast. And a human who is truly outcast from society, if they remain in the shackles of the idea of who they are, then they stand no chance of survival, because we're very, as animals, we're very dependent upon other humans for basic protection and food and shelter and things like that. So I think it's in our blood, as it were. It runs very deep. This looking to fit in, not wanting to rock the boat. We maybe some of us have a certain personality type that's a little bit rough around the edges, and it makes a show of being independent, but actually it's a false independence. There's no real independence there. It's all within a certain framework, but we don't ever step too far outside of that. And the good news here is that in order to discover who you are and to enjoy that, the richness of that, the gift of that, the truth of that, doesn't require that you become an outcast of society, but it does require that you are willing to encounter within yourself the uh, the falseness, the shackles that you have clung to because of the fear of becoming outcast. So the first thing is that I want to look at is start to shine some light on how it is that we shy away from actually seeing who we are because we cling to those shackles, those false notions of who we are that are provided to us by a society that says, don't rock the boat. And then the next step is then to actually have the courage, once you glimpse something of who you are, to have the courage to actually be who you are. So let's look first at the first step, which is to shine the light on the how we cling to these shackles of falseness and limitation that are given to us by the society. So this this, if you take a look, you'll see, and it will be either, it may or may not be apparent to you at first. So you might glimpse it right away, or it might require that you persistently look to see this. But it is possible, if you continue to look, you will see what I'm about to point out, which is that the message overall of the society is be small, be afraid. What's available to you is what's inside the box. That's the message. And the more you look, the more you'll see how that runs through every area of your thinking and perception. there's a in present day modern society, there's this tendency to uh, to suggest, usually very strongly, that uh, modern knowledge and understanding, scientific uh, understanding, and so forth, is the and technological progress, and all this is the pinnacle of human evolution, which is to say, the pinnacle of all evolution. That never before has anything so great and grand ever come about, and that anybody who doesn't fully and blindly accept that is, at best, an idiot. And so there's a tendency for most of us simply to never even see possibilities beyond that. But the dangers of this are great, because it says, again, that what society tells you about who you are is the truth. And the limitations that society gives you are the absolute limitations. They are real limitations, and that there's nothing beyond that. That anybody who believes otherwise is either an idiot, usually they're childish, they're naive, they're not to be trusted, at least not with anything important, or quite possibly they're just insane. But then take a look and see who is served by those limitations. And what I mean, like, so let's just take a couple examples that just come off the top of my head. So commonly it's suggested that modern technological medicine is, again, the pinnacle of human evolution, that never before has anything so great ever come about. And so what they have to say as the ultimate authority on the human body is the final word. And so when they say, well, look, we've used our machines and we've determined that there's this problem with your body, and here's what is necessary in order to correct that or intervene in that, then what's suggested very strongly is that that is the limit, and that knowledge is the absolute truth. And so you have to work within those parameters. That's what's suggested. And those constraints are like blinders if you accept them. And so you go about constrained to only those possibilities that exist within that narrow framework, because you're afraid to step outside of that. And if you do, then usually there's some significant pushback from society. So this is just one example. And it's not to say, and I'm not saying that medical system is wrong or bad. I'm not making those judgments, but I am just saying that it is narrow and it is exclusive, and it so while it has its application, it's not the whole truth. And so take a look then, who is served by that. And obviously, it's very self-serving. It's not, when I say self-serving, I mean that that framework serves itself, its own interests, the interests of that framework, not your interests per se. Sometimes there may be alignment. I'm not saying that there might not be. Again, I'm not saying that that system or that framework is wrong or bad, but it can be wrongly or poorly applied so that it is misaligned with the actual interests of the one who it's claiming to serve. So if you are interested in actually serving your own interests rather than the interests of some system or organization or philosophy, then you have to have the boldness and unreasonableness to actually look for yourself, to find out who you are and what you want, instead of trying to comply with something out there. And the problem, the difficulty or the challenge with this, and also the opportunity, is that when you start to look sincerely, you'll see that these limitations, these artificial limitations, the shackles, have infiltrated nearly every area of your perception. So that when I say you, and I point like that, notice who are you referencing, or what are you referencing when you think of yourself or perceive yourself or consider yourself. And it may or may not be obvious at first, but with ongoing persistent inquiry, you will start to see very clearly that out of habit, who you are or what you are referencing is not yourself at all, but it's these borrowed ideas, it's these shackles. And so if you are sincere about wanting freedom, if you're sincere about wanting authentic happiness, if you're sincere about wanting peace, then you have to be willing to stop referencing those false ideas, and you have to have the bold unreasonableness to actually start to look and find out who you are, because nobody else can know that. Only you can. So in this process of self-discovery, there's a certain shock that is required, and we have to have that shock many times, because otherwise there's a tendency to fall back into that hypnotic slumber. So that the shock actually is what allows us to wake up so that we can relax, because otherwise we're numb in that hypnotic trance. It's like a narcotic. There's tremendous pain because there's a misalignment, because the truth of who you are, which is like I don't know what would be the right analogy here, but the truth of who you are is trying to be fit and squeezed into some strange, ill-fitting mold, and it's never going to work. But so long as we attempt to do that, then the only relief we get is the narcotic relief of that hypnotic trance, which numbs the pain, which is what most people think of as relaxation, but it's not relaxation at all. So the shock is necessary. The shock of seeing that I've been deceiving myself. I've been going along I've been complying with the demands of a society that says I should serve it. because I will find my salvation in doing so. The shock of that is necessary so that we can realize this will never work. And then the bold unreasonableness has to be there to actually say, I won't go back to sleep. I won't go be lulled back into that hypnotic trance because it's so painful actually to do so. And so then it starts to become actually quite pleasurable in a new way, not in the old way of pleasure, because the old way of pleasure was not pleasure at all. The old way of pleasure turns out to be just awful. But a new way of pleasure that previously was perceived as something unwanted, but it starts to become clear that it's quite pleasurable to investigate and to see and root out all of these shackles so that they can be released, and to see I'm not that at all. I'm not any of these things. So let me try to be a little clearer about it, because I can't be necessarily too clear, because you have to ultimately find the things for yourself. It's individual in a sense, but I can point in with a little bit more specificity, so hopefully it will start to become clear to you if it's not already what I'm talking about. So take a look at your life presently, just take a little inventory of your life and notice how many conditions you have for yourself, for a sense of okayness. Can you experience okayness always in all conditions, or are there some conditions in which you believe that you cannot experience okayness? Now, maybe if you've been around for a while, you've heard me talk about these things and you've investigated and done inquiry and these things for yourself, then maybe straight away you say, oh, well, I know the right answer to this. I know that there should be no conditions. So there are no conditions. And maybe you have had glimpses of that. So there's a certain truth to that you can claim that there are no conditions. I'm always okay. And yes, that's true. If you can glimpse it, then yes, it's true. But set that aside for a moment and just look and see. There are still some conditions, actually, in practice. These are the edges, the places, the uncomfortable areas that you still would rather shy away from. You'd say, well, I know that I could be okay, but I really would rather not, because it would just be so uncomfortable. Okay, but just be willing, again, be bold. So you see, like, what are those edges? Can you go up closer to the edge? So, and that edge will be different for everybody. But, for some people, they'll say, well, if my income dropped below $10,000 a month, I'm not sure I would be okay. And other people would say, what are you kidding? $10,000 a month, I'd be living like a king. I live in a shack. But my edge is if the roof was ripped off of my shack, I'm not sure I would be okay. So the edge will be different for everybody, but just see there are these edges where they say, there's a condition there. There's a condition that I'm at least not so sure that I would be comfortable enough to acknowledge my okayness. So just take a look and see what are those. And it will be in lots of areas of your life where you say, well, so you've got, shelter. What about relationships? What if what's the edge in your relationships in terms of okayness? If you're married, and you consider yourself happily married, I guess maybe, then would you be okay if tomorrow your spouse said, I'm done, I'm out of here? Just see what are the conditions, because we've got conditions, all of us. And so these are the things that we want to take a look at. Because what we really want, which is who we really are, is unconditional peace, unconditional okayness, unconditional freedom, unconditional love. I mean, if we take away unconditional for a moment, just see, those are the things you want, right? You want peace, freedom, love. Fill in the blanks with whatever other words you want. And then just see, okay, yes, you want those things, but what you actually want is you want those things unconditionally. And that's where it starts to get a bit tricky, because you say, up to a certain point, we usually most people, I think, make this mistake of thinking, yeah, I want those things, and then they think they can have those things only conditionally. And so they set about trying to get to achieve the conditions for those things. So they say, I want I want abundance. So they say, well, I could experience abundance if I had $1 million. And so that's their condition. And so they set about trying to get the $1 million so that they can experience the abundance that they want. And you can do that with any area of your life. I'm just using that as one simple example. But then obviously the mistake with that is then, because it's conditional, there's an insecurity there, because we know, well, that condition has to then be not only achieved, but then it has to be maintained. It's like, okay, getting $1 million is one thing, but maintaining $1 million is a whole other thing. And $1 million today isn't worth $1 million tomorrow, not with inflation as it is. So then you've got to have more than $1 million tomorrow and maintain it. And so there's an inbuilt insecurity and anxiety there. And so eventually, blessedly, a maturity develops in us where we realize, well, maybe I should set about actually examining the conditions and seeing if those conditions are really necessary. And I think with maturity, we do this naturally in areas of our life. But what I'm inviting is that we can do that with everything completely, so that we can completely remove all of the conditions. And that's where I'm saying that this is bold and unreasonable, because the society says that there are limitations and conditions, and you just have to accept them, and you have to work within them, and you have to fight and struggle in order to achieve those things. And what I'm pointing out is what actually every one of us knows in our hearts, if we take a look sincerely, is that that's crazy. Because we don't want conditional anything, not in our hearts, not truly. We want unconditional. And the only way that we can have that is by boldly removing all of the false conditions. And those conditions are things that we've inherited. They're things that were given to us by our parents and by their parents and their parents and our teachers and our neighbors, and from television, from government, and from religion, and from everything else. And if we continue to try to achieve those conditions so that we can get what we think we need in order to have the things that we think we have to have in order to be okay, it's just a never-ending misery, because we're always postponing what we really want. We never actually arrive there, because we can never actually satisfactorily achieve and maintain completely those conditions. So again, these shocks are necessary, because we have to be shocked awake and see, I've been chasing after a mirage. It's a total impossibility. I was told that if I was just good enough and smart enough, and strong enough, and whatever, then I would get the goodies. But the shock is the realization I'll never get the goodies because I'll never be able to achieve all of those conditions. And even if I did, then there would be more conditions layered on because that's actually the game that's being played. And again, it doesn't serve you not truthfully. So the shock has to be there so that you realize I'm like a dog chasing after its own tail. And I've been playing that painful game for a long time. So then you start to take a look and you see, okay, so what do I really want? Well, just take a look right now and see, what do you really want? I mean, this is like I guess tends to be the case with these meetings, is they end up being fairly advanced lessons. Because, I don't know, because that's just what comes out. But it goes straight to the heart of it. I mean, this gives you everything if you are courageous enough to follow through on it. Because it's just the truth. I mean, it's just the honest truth. And I'm just spelling it out plainly so that it doesn't have to be too mysterious. What you want is unconditional peace. Can you see the truth of that? Can you just feel the truth of that? Notice, just can you just have can you imagine at least? Can you imagine unconditional peace? And when I say imagine, I mean, can you actually just feel it now? Can you just, for one instant, can you allow yourself that? Can you give yourself that gift to receive that unconditional peace now? And how is that possible? Just like by letting go, just by letting go of all of the conditions. Now, I'm not saying you necessarily can let go of all the conditions forever, but you can for right now, just for an instant, just so that you can have a glimpse of it. Anybody can do that, I think. Sometimes I question that. Sometimes I think maybe, I mean, I know everybody can, but sometimes I don't know if everybody. I don't know if everybody understands that. It seems like maybe not everybody understands it. But can you just notice that it's a possibility? Like when you go to sleep, it has to happen when you go to sleep, right? You can't keep holding on to all the stuff and go to sleep. And when I say go to sleep, I don't mean the dreaming state, but I mean the deep sleep state. That aspect of sleep that's so restorative, because for that moment you're letting go completely. And it has to happen. You can't go to sleep if you're still holding on. So notice what that is to drift off to sleep. There's a letting go. And notice that you can do that now while you're awake. There's a secret in that, by the way. When you're asleep, you're not actually asleep. The body is asleep, the mind is asleep, but you're awake, but you don't know that because you don't recognize who you are. But you can by doing what I'm suggesting right now, because the more that you strip away and let go of all the unnecessary stuff in the waking state, then you start to recognize clearly who you are, which is that which never comes and goes. It's always present. It's present in the waking state, in the dream state, in the deep sleep state. So then you start to realize that you're ever present. So then you can, this is what I'm pointing to have that courage to be yourself means that you don't latch on to and grasp at the unnecessary stuff, because the unnecessary stuff you start to see very clearly, it's only a strain. It doesn't contribute anything of real value. And the the real value of life is already here. It's a given. It's who you are. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, I guess. But just for a moment, just let go. Notice that it really is possible. You can do it. Again, don't try to sustain it, because that's unlikely at this stage. But you can for just one instant. And then just notice that you're aware in that moment of letting go. And there's nothing that you're aware of, because everything's let go of. So it's not that you're aware of something, but you're aware. Or if you want to say that you're aware of something, you're aware of yourself as that which is aware. But if you start trying to get hold of that, then you become like the dog chasing his tail again. So just drop it, just let go, and just see in this one instant what a relief it is, what freedom. And this is what I'm talking about. It's totally unconditional. And this is available if you practice this regularly throughout the day, throughout your life, in lots of different circumstances. Then you start to realize that this is truly unconditional, because it's available in all conditions. We don't normally see that because we're so caught up in the conditions. But if you start to practice just letting go in all the conditions, then you start to see, well, it's true. Even so, if you let go in all conditions, then you see that you are already unconditional being. Unconditional. You are unconditional. And here there's such a relief, such a freedom, such a peace, such happiness, that the more that you have the courage to let go and recognize this, the more you are releasing the all those shackles of the false conditions, false limitations. So I say it requires a boldness and unreasonableness, because again, the society tells you you've got to have, you should be very concerned and worried and stressed out. You've got to be working hard all the time to produce certain conditions. You need to have all of these things. And it will vary from person to person what those things are, what you've accepted. But when you see that the truth is you don't need any of those things, then you're looking in the right direction. And the more you glimpse that in real time, in all these various conditions, the more you, so I said the intention of this meeting is to support self-realization. So this is the realization of self, to make real in terms of actually manifesting at all levels. So the self is we can say unmanifest. There's an unmanifest self, but that's already true always. So there's nothing That's just always true. But what we care about actually is to realize that or manifest that at all levels, mentally, emotionally, physically. We want to actually manifest that. So that comes through um, inquiry. You just look and see and allow it to express, which is all that I'm pointing out here. So the more that you do this inquiry, the more that it removes the interference so that the clarity of who you are is manifest. And what I'm, it's a little bit tricky what I'm trying to say here, but your whole, you'll see that your behavior will change, because your behavior presently is uh like most of us is largely unconscious. It's just reactions to the these shackles that I'm as I'm calling them. So these conditions that you've accepted, they set the limits, and when you run up against those limits in your experience, then automatically there's a reaction, and so your behavior is just a reaction to those limits. Say, oh no, I've got to do something. Oh no, my income dropped below $10,000 a month. Now I'm freaking out. I've got to do something. But when you inquire and you see that that's not actually true, then no longer no longer are you reacting. So your behavior changes, your thinking changes, your feeling changes, your everything about you changes. So the your true self is made manifest at all levels, mentally, emotionally, physically. So it, the process is very simple, but not necessarily very easy, because we run up against fear. I think fear is, from my own observation, it appears that fear is the main driver. It's possible that it's not always the case for everybody, but it seems to me that the main driver is fear. And so we encounter when we have a certain tolerance threshold for fear, and um, when we get to that threshold, then usually we go unconscious and we just go back into accepting all of the shackles. But that's why I'm saying that it requires boldness and unreasonableness, because we have to be willing to see clearly for ourselves that I've been keeping myself stuck in this prison for a long time. And the reward, the promised reward of safety, actually is not sufficient, because it's not actually worth it to have this so-called safety, but not actually have the deep satisfaction of knowing who I am and living that truthfully. And so long as I'm allowing fear to be my constraint, then I'm not fully realizing myself. I'm limiting myself artificially. So when that becomes clear, then you there's no choice actually other than to just continue with this boldness and unreasonableness, and just to say, I won't settle for anything less than the truth. I won't settle for anything less than who I really am and what I really want. And if society says that's unrealistic, that it's not real, it doesn't exist, so be it. But I can't continue to enact self-harm by imprisoning myself in a reaction to fear. Instead, there's a clarity that what I truly want is freedom unconditionally. And so then the inquiry just has to be this living process of just whenever that fear is encountered. And this is why I'm saying this first, these two steps blend into one another. The first one is the unreasonableness and boldness to see who you are and what you want. And then the second step is to continue to have the courage to be who you are and what you want. So it's not, there's no hard dividing line, but just to see, okay, first you have to have this glimpse, and then you have to have the courage to persist in that, because you see that the trade-off is no longer worth it. I'm not willing to trade my freedom and and truth for what passes for security. And if if the if the cost of freedom is possible death, then so be it. And not in a reckless way, not in a angry, reactive way, but in a just from clear seeing, just to see that I can't continue to harm myself by living lies, by holding back, by reacting every time that there's fear. Instead, I'm going to just boldly, unreasonably, and courageously, with eyes and heart wide open, encounter this experience and let go of all the conditions. So that whatever this is, I'm going to just be with it and or as it. I'm not going to shy away from it. And like I said, it's very simple, but not necessarily easy, because fear seems to be a very strong motivator to back down or run away or shy away or hide. But like I said, it's an active relaxation. So we encounter the fear through active relaxation. So you just notice, okay, here's fear. And there's a tendency, there's an impulse to react. There's an impulse to shy away or hide or fight or resist or whatever. But there's also a clear seeing that that's not the truth actually of who I am. The truth of who I am is unconditional peace, unconditional freedom. So I choose that now. I choose that now by releasing all the conditions. So if there's a condition that says I'm not allowed to experience fear, that fear is a problem, then I let go of that. So fear is no longer an obstacle. Fear is no longer a problem. Fear is allowed. I can experience fear and simultaneously know myself as I am and realize what it is that I want. So this is available to everybody. I'm certain of it. The degree or the how easy it is to recognize will vary from person to person. But in my view, it's the only thing worth doing. I think that's true. I'm just checking to see if that's true. I can't think of anything else that's worth doing. With that said, I do plenty of other things, but almost always with with this inquiry in the background or in the foreground or running simultaneous, because it's the only thing worth doing. So I hope that this has made some sense, and that you have received it in a way that is valuable to you. And that's all I got to say for today, for now. For those who are here live, I'm happy to stay on for Q&A. I'm going to end this recording now.